Long before contactless cards and buy now, pay later, British families ran their homes on a discipline so sharp it could stretch a single wage packet across 30 days without a penny to spare. These were not grand sacrifices. They were small, clever, almost invisible habits, like soap saved, collars turned, and tea leaves squeezed for one more cup, passed quietly from mother to daughter across kitchen tables. Each one alone saved coppers. Together they kept families fed, warm and proud through rationing, slumps, and long northern winters. Today most have vanished, dismissed as fussiness. But every single one was genius. Let's count down the 30 British saving habits that stretched a few pennies all month, starting with number 30. Number 30, saving brown paper and string, was the quiet first commandment of the thrifty household. Every parcel was opened with the care of a surgeon, the knot picked loose rather than cut, the paper smoothed flat and folded into the dresser drawer. By the 1950s, nearly every kitchen kept a ball of string growing fatter on a hook by the door, fed by every delivery from the grocer and the draper. Children learned never to tear wrapping, because that same sheet would wrap next week's sandwiches or line a cake tin. A reel of string cost a few pence, but the household that hoarded it never had to buy any. It seems absurd now, in an age of sticky tape and bin bags. Yet that drawer of folded paper was the first lesson in a simple truth. Nothing that came into the house left it without earning its keep. Number 29. The shilling in the meter taught a whole generation the price of light and warmth in the most literal way. Gas and electricity came not on a quarterly bill, but coin by coin, fed into a hungry box under the stairs. Because every unit had a face, families counted them. Only one light burned at a time, switched off the moment a room emptied. Diaries from the era record the dread of the meter running dry mid-bath on a winter's night, the scramble for a spare coin in the housekeeping tin. The fire was lit late and let die early, and mothers cooked 2 meals in one oven heating, the pudding sliding in as the joint came out. That coin-fed box was a tyrant, but it made waste visible, and a family that could see its pennies burning learned to guard them. Number 28. Newspaper was the unpaid workhorse of the British home, valued long after its headlines had grown stale. Nothing was bought to do a job that yesterday's paper could do for nothing. Crumpled and twisted into firelighters, it coaxed the morning grate to life. Scrunched and dampened with vinegar, it polished windows to a streakless shine no shop spray could match. It lined drawers, wrapped the fish supper, blacked the boots, and stuffed the toes of wet shoes by the hearth. A daily paper cost a penny or two and was read cover to cover, but its real value came afterwards, in the dozen humble tasks it performed before finally feeding the flames. Number 27. Buying the broken bits was a small art that fed families for a fraction of the going rate. At the grocer's counter sat a tin of broken biscuits, the casualties of the delivery cart, sold for half the price of whole ones, and a child never minded a broken custard cream. At the bacon counter, the ragged offcuts went for coppers and made a fine breakfast all the same. Day-old bread from the baker, marked down at closing time, became toast and bread pudding without a soul the wiser. Oral histories from market towns recall the Saturday evening trade, when prices dropped and the thrifty filled their baskets. The taste was identical, only the shape was wanting, and a shape filled no stomach. Number 26. Walking everywhere, rather than paying for the privilege of riding, was a habit so ordinary it scarcely seemed like saving at all. A tram or bus fare of a penny or two each way mounted across a family of 5 into shillings a week that could not be spared. So children walked to school in all weathers, mothers walked to the shops with a basket on each arm, and fathers walked to the works rather than wait at the stop. The Saturday outing was a stroll to the park, not a ride into town. By foot, the family kept the bus fares in the tin where they belonged. The legs grew strong, the shoes wore thin, and the money saved bought a Sunday joint that a fortnight of fares would have eaten clean away. Number 25. Saving the slivers of soap revealed everything about a household's discipline. No bar was ever thrown away while a scrap remained. The thin, cracked ends that slipped from soapy hands were dropped into a jar on the windowsill, and when enough had gathered, they were pressed warm into a single new bar, or knotted into a square of muslin for the wash. Some thrifty wives jammed the new bar onto the old, warming both until they fused into one. A tablet of carbolic cost only pence, but a family that wasted nothing might buy one bar where the careless bought 3. Children grew up believing that throwing away soap was a small sin, and that belief, multiplied across a year, kept real money in the housekeeping pot. Number 24. Using the tea leaves twice, and sometimes thrice, stretched the most beloved British luxury further than any other trick in the kitchen. Tea was dear and rationed within living memory, so the leaves in the pot were never tipped out after a single brew. The afternoon pot was simply topped with fresh water for a weaker second drawing. Even spent, the leaves earned their keep, scattered damp across the carpet to settle the dust before sweeping. A quarter pound of loose tea cost more than most cared to spend, so every leaf was wrung dry of flavor. The brew grew pale by evening, but it was hot and wet and brown, and in a cold terrace that was comfort enough to keep a family from buying a single ounce too much. Number 23. Candle ends were gathered like treasure in the days before reliable electric light, and even after. When a candle guttered down to a stub too short to hold, it was not discarded, but dropped into a tin with all its fellows. When the tin was full, the stubs were melted together in an old pan over the fire, a length of string laid down the middle of a mold, and a brand new candle rose from the remains of a dozen dead ones. A box of candles cost a few pence, but in homes where the meter ran dry or the power failed, the home-poured candle was free light conjured from waste. Children watched the slow alchemy of melting wax and learned that the end of a thing was rarely the end of its usefulness. Number 22. The button tin and the rubber band ball were the small museums of household thrift found in every kitchen drawer in Britain. No garment was thrown out before its buttons were snipped off and dropped into a battered OXO tin, ready to replace the next that pinged loose from a shirt. Hooks, buckles, zips, and press studs joined them. A private haberdashery that meant a trip to the draper was rarely needed. To buy a button when a tin held 100 was unthinkable. Oral histories are full of these tins, rattled by grandchildren who could not fathom why anyone kept 400-odd buttons. But the woman who kept them never paid tuppence for one in an emergency. And over a lifetime, those tuppences became pounds. Number 21. Bottling and preserving turned a summer glut into a winter larder and kept the family fed long after the gardens went bare. When the allotment overflowed or the market sold plums cheap by the basket, the kitchen became a steaming factory of Kilner jars and bubbling pans. Fruit was packed tight and sealed with rubber rings, eggs were laid in isinglass to keep for months, and surplus vegetables went into jars of clear vinegar. By autumn, the pantry shelves sagged under rows of jewel-bright bottles, each one a meal bought at high summer prices and eaten in the dead of February, when shop produce cost a fortune. A few pounds of cheap fruit and a packet of sugar became a season of puddings. The household that bottled in August never paid the winter premium. Number 20. Saving every jam jar was the natural partner to all that bottling, and no glass vessel ever left the house if it could be scrubbed and kept. The empty jar from the shop-bought marmalade became next year's homemade jam pot. Jars held buttons, screws, nails, dripping, and pickled onions. They measured flour and stored seeds, and they became drinking glasses for the children and vases for hedgerow flowers. To buy a storage container would have struck the post-war housewife as the height of folly when the cupboard already held 24 sound jars. A pot of jam cost its price once, but its jar served the family for years. That refusal to throw away good glass meant the kitchen was furnished entirely by what others would have binned. Number 19. The mangle in the washing line did the work that a paid laundry, or later a costly machine, would charge dearly for. Wash day was Monday, a ritual of dolly tubs, washboards, and a copper boiler heated over the fire, and not a penny went to anyone outside the home. The wet clothes were fed through the heavy iron rollers of the mangle until the water gushed out, and the linen came through flat and half dry, ready for the line, where sun and wind finished the job for free. A trip to the launderette cost shillings a week. The household that boiled, mangled, and pegged its own kept every one of them, and the only cost was labor, which cost nothing at all. Number 18. The stone hot water bottle made the bedroom bearable without ever lighting a fire in it, and saved a fortune in fuel across a long British winter. Bedrooms in the terraced house were simply not heated. A fire upstairs was an extravagance reserved for the sick. Instead, the heavy earthenware bottle was filled from the kettle at bedtime, wrapped in an old jumper, and slipped between the sheets to warm a patch for cold feet. A family slept under a mountain of coats and blankets, in a room cold enough to mist the breath. The fuel to heat a bedroom all evening could have cost as much as the kitchen fire itself. The household that warmed the bed, instead of the room, kept its coal where it counted. Number 17. Boiling the bones for stock ensured that even the bare carcass of a meal gave up its last farthing of value. When the Sunday chicken was picked clean or the joint reduced to bone, nothing went in the bin. The carcass went into a great pot with an onion, a carrot, and the peelings saved through the week, then simmered for hours until the kitchen smelled of richness and the bones gave up their marrow. That cloudy golden stock became Monday's soup, Tuesday's gravy, the base of a dozen meals that cost almost nothing because the meat had already been paid for. A stock cube might have done the job for a penny, but the bone stock was free and finer. The household that boiled its bones fed itself twice from a single joint. Number 16. The rag rug grew on the hearth from the corpses of worn-out clothes and warmed the floor for the price of nothing at all. When a shirt was past turning and a sheet worn through, the good cloth was cut into strips and hooked through a backing of old Hessian sacking, loop by patient loop, on the long winter evenings by the fire. The result was a thick, warm, gloriously mismatched rug that took the chill off cold stone flags and lasted for years. Every member of the family could see their old garments woven into the floor beneath their feet. A bought rug cost shillings the household did not have. This one cost only the evenings spent making it, and it transformed the rubbish of the rag bag into comfort. Number 15. Re-soling shoes and tapping them with Blakey's segs kept a single pair walking for years rather than months. Shoes were dear, and a growing family in new footwear every season was unthinkable, so footwear was maintained like any precious tool. The cobbler stitched on new soles for a fraction of the price of new shoes, and many a father did the job himself on a cast-iron last in the shed, hammering metal segs into the heels and toes to save the wear. The clip of seg-shod feet on the pavement was the sound of a careful household. A pair of children's shoes cost real money. A set of segs cost pennies, and trebled the life of the sole. The family that mended its shoes walked for years on one purchase. Number 14. Turning the shirt collar gave a worn-out shirt a second life and saved the cost of a new one entirely. The collar and cuffs always frayed long before the body of a man's shirt gave out, so the thrifty wife took her unpicking scissors to the seams, removed the worn collar, turned it inside out so the frayed edge sat hidden underneath, and stitched it back on looking near new. A new shirt was a serious expense in any working household, while turning a collar cost nothing but skill and patience. Sons remember their fathers heading to work in shirts mended this way for a decade. It was invisible economy, the sort that let a family appear smart on a wage that could not have bought the wardrobe new. Number 13. Hand-me-downs and the generous hem-clothed whole broods of children for the price of dressing the eldest. Garments passed down the line from child to child, taken in and let out, patched and repaired, until they had served 3 or 4 small bodies. Mothers sewed deep hems into everything, so a dress could be let down a few inches each year as a girl grew, lasting 2 or 3 seasons instead of 1. The youngest in a large family might never wear a new garment until they were grown. A child's full wardrobe bought new each year would have ruined a budget. Passed down and let out, it cost almost nothing after the first. Nobody was ashamed. Everyone did the same, and the cloth was wrung of every last wearing. Number 12. Make do and mend, the wartime creed that long outlived the war, kept the needle and the darning mushroom in constant use across the land. Socks were not thrown out at the first hole, but darned. The wooden mushroom slipped inside the heel, and the threads were woven across the gap until the sock was sound again. Elbows were patched with leather ovals, knees reinforced, tears invisibly mended. A new pair of socks cost money. A ball of darning wool mended a dozen and cost a fraction. Oral histories recall whole evenings of mending by the wireless. The basket of holy socks worked down to nothing. The skill kept clothes in service years past their natural end, and a family that mended bought a quarter of what it otherwise would have. Number 11. Banking the fire and burning the slack made a single bag of coal last twice as long through the cold months. Coal was the great expense of the British winter, and the family that burned it carelessly froze by February. So the fire was tended like a living thing. At night, the last of the embers were covered with damp slack, the cheap coal dust the local merchant gave away, which smoldered slowly until morning, when a poke and a few sticks brought it roaring back without the waste of relighting from cold. 100 weight of coal cost real money. The household that banked its fire stretched it across the days while the wasteful neighbor ordered more. Warmth, carefully managed, was bought once and used to the last cinder. Number 10. Keeping a few hens in the backyard turned kitchen scraps into a steady supply of eggs and the occasional Sunday dinner. Eggs were rationed within memory and never cheap, so the family with a coop at the bottom of the garden had a small daily fortune pecking at their feet. The hens cost almost nothing to keep, fed on peelings, stale crusts, and scraps that would otherwise have rotted. In return, they laid fresh eggs through the warmer months, and when a bird stopped laying, it became the dinner. A dozen shop eggs cost more than most cared to pay, A backyard flock laid them for the cost of the scraps already paid for. The hens were a tiny private farm that converted the dustbin into breakfast. Number 9. The allotment was the family's second larder, a patch of rented earth that fed the table through the year for the price of seeds and sweat. For a few shillings a year, a working man could rent a strip of ground from the council and grow potatoes, cabbages, beans, and soft fruit enough to feed his household and fill the bottling jars besides. Evenings and weekends were spent digging and tending, the children sent down with cans of water, and the harvest came home in barrow loads. Vegetables that cost a fortune across a year at the greengrocer were grown for almost nothing, and the surplus was traded over the fence for eggs. The family that grew its own greens cut the grocery bill in half and ate fresher than any shopper could. Number 8. The co-op divvy was the cleverest savings scheme the working class ever had, and every household guarded its number like a secret. When a family shopped at the cooperative store, the assistant noted their membership number, recited by children before they knew their own address, and a share of the store's profits was set aside against every purchase. Twice a year the dividend was paid out, a welcome lump sum that came from money already spent on the ordinary weekly shop. For many families, the divvy paid for the children's shoes, the Christmas goose, or a week at the seaside. It cost nothing to join, and it turned everyday spending into a twice-yearly windfall. No modern loyalty card ever matched the joy of the co-op divvy day, when the saved-up pennies came marching home as pounds. Number 7. The Christmas Club and the savings stamp made the unaffordable affordable by breaking it into pennies across the year. Knowing that December would bring expense no single wage could cover, families paid a little each week into a club run by the corner shop, the butcher, or the savings stamp book from the post office. A few pence handed over every Friday quietly built, through the long months, into the sum that bought the turkey, the toys, and the trimmings without debt or dread. Come Christmas, the saver collected a hamper or a fat envelope of their own money handed back. It cost nothing extra, only the discipline of paying in. The household that joined a club met December with a smile, while the improvident met it with the pawnbroker. Number 6. Borrowing and sharing between neighbors meant that a whole street might own a single ladder, and nobody wasted money on tools used twice a year. The terrace was a community larder of lent goods, a cup of sugar over the wall, a borrowed mangle, a shared lawnmower, a ladder that lived in one yard but served 12 houses. Why should every household buy a tool it needed only at spring clean when the street between them owned everything once? Big jobs were done together, the cost split, the use shared round. To buy what a neighbor would happily lend was thought wasteful. The street pooled its possessions, and each family lived as though it owned far more than it had paid for. Number 5. Mending the cracked plate rather than replacing it kept the dinner service whole for a generation. When a treasured plate or jug cracked, it was not thrown out but mended, sometimes by the traveling tinker who drilled tiny holes either side of the break and bound it with fine metal rivets. Sometimes at home with a careful dab of glue. A favorite teapot might soldier on for years with a riveted spout, and pots with worn-out bottoms were taken to be re-tinned rather than scrapped. A full dinner service cost more than a week's wage. A few rivets cost coppers. The household that mended its crockery ate off the same plates for decades, and the chip and the rivet were marks of care, not poverty-shame. Number 4. The corner shop slate carried a family through the lean days between paydays without a penny of interest charged. The local shopkeeper knew his customers and kept a tally book, letting trusted families take their groceries on tick and settle up on payday. When the housekeeping ran short before Friday came, The bread, tea, and margarine still arrived home, written down to be cleared when the wage packet did. Bartering ran alongside it. Eggs swapped for jam, a day's labor for a sack of coal, garden surplus traded over the fence. No bank, no card, no charge. The slate smoothed the dips between paydays for nothing but the keeping of one's word, and the family that paid the book promptly never went hungry waiting for the wage to come round. Number 3. Sharing the bath water made the weekly wash possible without a fortune spent on heating it. Hot water was costly to make, heated copper by copper, so the Friday night bath in the tin tub before the fire was a shared affair. The same water served the whole family in turn, topped with a fresh kettle between bathers, working down from cleanest to grubbiest, often the youngest first, the father last in the cooling, graying water. The phrase about throwing the baby out with the bathwater came from exactly this scene. To draw a fresh, fully heated bath for each person would have burned through fuel no household could spare. The shared tub meant the family stayed clean on a single heating, and the arithmetic of hot water was unforgiving. Number 2. Cleaning the whole house with bicarbonate, vinegar, and a halved lemon kept the cupboard free of costly bottled products that did no better. Long before the supermarket shelf groaned with a different spray for every surface, the British home was scoured spotless with 3 cheap staples: white vinegar-cut grease, cleaned windows, and descaled the kettle, bicarbonate of soda scrubbed pots, freshened drains, and lifted stains. A cut lemon brightened brass and banished smells, and a little salt scoured a burnt pan. These cost a few pence and lived in every kitchen anyway. The household that cleaned this way bought almost nothing for the purpose, while the modern home spends pounds each month on a parade of branded bottles that do the same job no better. Number 1. And finally, in first place. The housekeeping tin and the jam jar budget were the master habit beneath all the others, the iron discipline that made every penny answer for itself. On payday, the wage was brought home and divided at the kitchen table into separate tins or jars, each labeled and sacred. So much for the rent, so much for coal, for the insurance man, the burial club, the grocer, the gas. What went into the rent jar was rent and nothing else, and the family would go without before it was touched. Whatever survived to the bottom of the food tin set the menu, and not a penny more was spent. Mothers ran this system with a precision that would shame an accountant, knowing to the farthing what the month could bear. Diaries and oral histories return again and again to this ritual, the careful counting out of coins into their proper homes, the quiet authority of the woman who held the tin. But it was the genius that made all the saving possible. The soap saved, the collar turned, the fire banked, because every habit on this list was only the working out of one unbreakable rule. Know exactly what you have, give every penny a job, and never ever let one wander off without leave. From the saved string at number 30 to the housekeeping tin at the very top, these 30 habits tell one story. Families with almost nothing made it stretch through sheer ingenuity and discipline, and were prouder for it. Most have vanished now, swept away by plenty and convenience. But everyone was genius. Try just one this month, and see how far a few pennies can still go. Your grandmother knew. Now you do too.